So there's this word I've been thinking about lately, and that word is investment. Now, any process that will yield growth is going to require investment on somebody's behalf, right? Like if you are growing a crop, for example, you must invest seed in the ground. If you are trying to become a karate grandmaster, you will have to invest time and energy and like mental sharpness into learning the art of karate, right? If you're trying to become an awesome baseball player, you're going to have to invest time and energy in practicing and learning how to identify pitches and learning how to throw pitches, learning how to field and learning the nuances of the game, all these sort of things, right? That makes a lot of sense to us. But for some reason, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense when we move into the church realm, right? I remember this conversation I had with my sister when she was like 16. We were sitting kind of down at like the family table, and she started talking about how she just felt like recently, like she went to church, went to youth group, the whole 9 yards. She was like, I just feel like recently, like I'm not getting enough out of it. Like I feel like it's not deep enough for me. Which was a really interesting thing to say. And I'm not knocking it by any means. It's not the only conversation that I've heard go that way. In fact, I've had conversations as a pastor, conversations with full-grown adults, like 40-year-old people who like will say that about church in various forms. I even, in my teenage years, had a moment very similar to my sister's. And I'm not knocking that. I think it's actually a really good thing. I think anybody who's serious about following Jesus has had or will have that moment. It's a very good thing. Let me tell you why. Because the moment you start to feel like church as you know it is not deep enough or not enough for you is exactly the moment that you're starting to come of age spiritually. Here's what I mean. You're starting to mature spiritually. The more basic spiritual nourishment that used to satisfy you now just leaves you more hungry than ever. Does that sound familiar? This is a really, really good and healthy process. In fact, it's something Jesus even experienced, right? Like there's a story in Luke 2 where Jesus is 12 years old, and for the first time, he gets to experience a Passover festival. Now, this is a big deal because at 12 is when a Jewish boy would come of age, right? It'd be the time when he's expected to start to learn a trade, right? It'd be the first time he was expected to attend all of like the Passover, like the important stuff, like the meal and the sacrifices and all the rigmarole. It was essentially when a Jewish boy or girl would become responsible for their own spiritual development. And so Jesus' family is in a place called Galilee, and they and their whole neighborhood traveled down to Jerusalem for this Passover, this religious festival that was very important to Jewish people. And they traveled as a cohort, and men and women were kind of separate in that day. And so the family and the whole neighborhood leaves to go back to Galilee. They get a couple of days down the road. Remember, they're walking and on wagons and donkeys and stuff. And mom and dad kind of look at each other and are like, I thought he was with you. No, I thought he was with you. And they freak out and run back to Jerusalem. And they find Jesus where? They find him discussing God with older people. Discussing God, asking questions, answering questions, engaging his faith, engaging his soul, investing in the growth of his soul in a way that was uncommon for a 12-year-old. Now, this isn't the only time that Jesus does this. Actually, it's a lifetime habit. We look 2 chapters later, Luke 4 verses 14 is where this story starts, and it fast forwards like 20 years. Jesus is probably somewhere around 30, and Jesus has been traveling around the region of Judea. It says he comes home to Nazareth, and it says he goes to the synagogue, the place of Jewish religious teaching. on like their day of worship, and it says as was his custom. So we know that this was his regular practice, that weekly he would go and engage in faith. Now the structure of a synagogue is a little bit different than like normal church, right? So you would have this kind of two separate sections. You'd have liturgy and sermons. Liturgy were songs and poems and prayers that everybody knew that you would repeat over and over again. And then there would be this sermon part where somebody, a man, would stand up out of the congregation, open the scroll, read from the law or the prophets, parts of our Old Testament. He would read it, and then he would sit down and tell everybody, teach everybody a lesson or tell people what it meant. Sound familiar? Yeah, it should, because it's essentially kind of the sermon portion in our modern day church service. Now, here's where it's a little different. After that person is done talking, which they would expect to be like interesting and kind of short, not short, but like to the point, concise. They kind of expected them to bring a good message, right? And then after that person was done talking, people in the crowd, the people listening, would ask questions. Not exactly something you can do if you sleep through the message, right? So let me ask you this. Today is the 33rd episode of Trinity Sessions, and we're talking about studying. Do you see a church service as we do it today as an opportunity to study? Do you see it as an opportunity to invest in your own spiritual development? Because I'm telling you, it is 100%. It is. Well, here's the thing. Most of us, we come to church and we're like, oh God, I can't wait till this is over so I can just go home or go eat or go hang out with friends or do my homework. And we sort of kind of like sleepwalk through this whole thing. Only later in the week, wake up and realize that we are spiritually hungry, and then we sort of externalize that frustration. Here's what I'm suggesting to you. That if you're feeling that way, that it is now time for you to start feeding yourself. That you would take the obligation for your own spiritual development, that you would begin to invest in your soul. Man, talk about a big responsibility, but one you're totally capable of. So how do you do that? Well, it's actually pretty simple. Like, just put more in, right? Remember that whole investment principle is the idea there is that you will get out. What you get out, rather, is proportionate to what you put in. So what you put in is in direct proportion to what you get out. If you're investing in the stock market, the more you put in, most of the time, the more you put out, assuming your investment's a good one, right? Same thing with learning in the class at school, right? The more effort you put in, the better grade you're gonna get. Same thing here. But there are a couple of ways that you can get the most out of this process. The first thing is come expectant, right? So three things. First one's come expectant. Like, when you come to church, do you expect to hear God speak to you in a personal way through that message, right? Do you expect that something awesome is going to happen? Or do you just think that this is just something that I do? Right? As a communicator, the very beginning of writing a message is listening for what I feel like God wants to say to the audience through me. See, when we begin to expect that God is going to show up and speak to us and bring insights to us through the person talking, it changes everything. So the first thing is come expecting. The second thing, take notes. Use the same strategies you would use at school, at church, and see what happens. Just invest more. Like, engage your mind. If you're a note taker or a doodler or, whatever it is, whatever strategy works for you at school, try that at church and just see what happens. So the second thing is take notes. So remember, it's come expecting, take notes. The third thing is talk it out. Now, this is why we do small groups and table groups at CCOF. We want you to have an opportunity to engage with it on your own, right? We want your mind to be, and your spirit to be engaging with the materials and thinking through it. So talk it out. Find somebody to talk it out with. Whether you're doing Zoom, life groups over Zoom, or you've got your Trinity group here, or maybe it's just a friend that you went to, also watch church this week, or maybe it's just your family. Talk it out, because the more you engage with it, the more you become familiar with it, the more you invest in it, the more you will grow. It's real easy. So first thing, come expecting. Take notes and talk it out. Man, thank you guys for joining us. Your Trinity practice today is pretty simple. Find a sermon. Could be one from our church, could be from another church. Watch it together in your Trinity group. Take some notes and listen specifically for how you feel God is speaking to you, and then share that with your Trinity group. Watch a sermon, invest with it, and share how God spoke to you through it. I really believe if you take this study opportunity seriously, you get a lot out of it. And remember, what you put in is directly proportional to what you get out. Have a great day, guys. We'll see you later.